over 15 Super Bowls. I probably changed my mind probably 10 times. I've won 3 Emmys.
Frank Ghetto and Associates is a television lighting and consulting firm in Boca Raton, Florida. They specialize in lighting sporting events in the U.S. and around the globe. Events like Showtime Boxing, Ultimate Fighting Championships, Major League Baseball, and College Game Day, just to name a few. Now, here's your host and CEO of Viteri Vibes, Sandy Viteri.
Thank you very much, Dean. It is a pleasure to be here again today. Frank, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
It is an honor to have you here. Frank, I was reading about your story, and it is an inspiration to hear about your story, because you have been in business for over 30 years, obviously a long time. 30 years ago, you decided one day that you actually wanted to start your own business. And that day, you actually, when you started it, it actually took you about 7 years working on it as a part-time job. And there's got to be a reason why you wanted to hold on to your job as a full-time and also have this part-time job as an entrepreneur.
I was from New York City, and I had attended New York University for a while. I always wanted to come to Florida, so I was down here on a weekend, and I went in for an interview at WTVJ. I didn't get hired immediately, but about 2 months later, I had gotten a call, and I came down to Florida, and that's when I started working at WTVJ. I was a lighting director there for 17 years. Okay. And during that time, a lot of lighting directors from New York, from the networks, would come down to Florida, and I used to be their assistant. So I learned quite a bit from them. So therefore, I saw a need. Maybe I should just be a freelancer. It started out part-time. Okay. And then after 17 years, I started to get the bug in my head to go out on my own.
So that it was just instrumental. You saw the need in the market, and that is what triggered that inside of you, huh?
Yeah, yes,
okay.
But it was not easy.
Okay.
I would have to say...
It never is,
yeah,
right away.
I would have to say that I remember thinking about it at the beginning of the year. I forget what year it was, but it wasn't until September of that year that I actually followed through on it. Okay. And all along that time, I probably changed my mind probably 10 times. And
that's very common, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
So first you say, "Oh, I've been here so long, and I'll probably lose my health insurance, and what am I going to do there?" That's and then I kept thinking about the positive side of it, and what made me do it? What made me pull the trigger there? That September of that year, I really don't know. I just did it. One of the things I did was I got a piece of paper, put a line down, and say, what are the opportunities here for me? Well, I could start a big company. I could have people working for me. I could travel and this, that. And what if it doesn't work out for me? So I says, oh, now you have to start thinking about that.
So you look at the pros and the cons.
Then I said, well, what would I do if it didn't work out? So I said, well, I'm pretty good at electricity. I could always do some work like that. I could always mow lawns. I could always get a roommate and help me pay the mortgage. And I put together a plan, like, what if? And growing up, I didn't have too much. So I knew that I could survive, and I knew that I had to tighten up and not go out to eat so much, or and things like that. So you do have to sacrifice. So the thing I could say about that is have a plan B. So it gives you more confidence.
Right.
Like, in other words, if it fails, I'm not going to go living under a bridge somewhere. I'm going to.
Right.
I could do this and I could do that. So that gives you the confidence to go ahead with your plan.
Exactly.
I started getting jobs right away, and then I did a boxing match in Miami for USA Network, and I did a very good job. Then they asked me if I could do a month later in Tampa, and I said yes I could, and I went and did that, and then I told them I was now a freelancer, and he said, "Oh, great, we'll put you on the whole tour."
And then I believe you landed your first national deal with ESPN, right?
Yes.
Kickboxing.
Right. That was when ESPN first started. They were doing shows like that.
And at the time, ESPN was a very small network,
Yes.
but by now it's obviously pretty big.
Right. So then they decided to come down here. We had a Super Bowl in Miami, and they asked me to work for them.
Right.
And I did that. And I remember Chris Berman was doing the show. All of a sudden, Chris came up to me and said, "Frank, I've been getting calls that I look a lot better here on the road than I do in my studio at ESPN in Bristol." So I said, "Oh, thank you," And then from then on, they just kept hiring me for everything that they did. So I worked on probably over 15 Super Bowls.
Nice.
It was it turned out to be very good. And then I started doing things like the Final Four, and then we had a boxing series, and then I hooked up with some more people and started to work for me. And then we got an HBO contract to do their boxing, and then we got a Showtime UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championships. Today we do all of their shows worldwide. So it started out just as a small thing, and it blossomed into something huge. Matter of fact, they paid $3 million for that show.
Wow.
And they just sold it for $4.2 billion.
Incredible.
So it's
incredible
yes.
story. Yes.
And we were part of it.
So an amazing success story. Incredible. And what we were talking about right before we started here with the podcast is exactly that, is the inspiration behind this show and why I wanted to share with our audience. And all of us entrepreneurs have fears. And you just talked about the fears that you had, right?
Yes.
And going back to the very beginning of your career, where you had your full-time job and you were considering this as a part-time job for 7 years, and it took you a long time, to actually pull the trigger. And there were many, many days where you were thinking maybe yes and maybe not. And you had to sit down and write down in a piece of paper the pros and the cons. And you had many doubts. You finally made that decision. And look at you 30 years later. What a success story. It is okay to have the fears that we feel. It is okay to feel at times that, we feel insecure, that we feel that we may not want to do this, but then turn it around into something positive and go for it, because at the end, you will see the positive results, right?
Correct. The head of Federal Express wrote a paper to do an overnight delivery service. He failed. And look at him now.
Exactly.
So, you always come up with things like that.
Well, I don't necessarily see failure as failure. I see failure as trying.
Sure.
If you're not trying, you're just not giving it all.
You learn more from your failures
Exactly.
than you do from your
successes.
successes.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. So the other thing that I really wanted to tackle in this show is the why. So why did you do it?
I was getting tired of working for corporations, and I wanted to try something on my own and see how far I could get.
A piece of advice that you could give to entrepreneurs. What would you say to them if they're starting today like you were 30 years ago, with that fear, with that, the little bubbles inside of your stomach, and what would you say to them? Just talk to them directly.
I would say, the first thing I would say is be as good as you can with what you're doing, okay? Read up on people who are in the same position or people who are successful, and try to follow what they do. Even if you just pick one thing out of it. I get to work on the World Series. I'm with baseball stars. I'm with the heavyweight champion of the world.
Very
so just
good.
focus on what you're doing and be really good at it.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking to you today. I think it's a very inspirational story, and I hope it really inspires a lot of other people.
Okay,
I
thank
really,
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Now, we would love to hear from you. Tell us on the comments below. Was this advice helpful to you today? And how can you put some of what you learn into practice right away to start to see a difference in your entrepreneurial journey? Also, don't forget, if you found this podcast helpful, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and hit the like button so we know to make more podcasts like this one.